Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study of the entire Bible. Currently, we are in Nehemiah chapters 10. We're going to try to get through 10 through 12, and you will see why I am attempting to do this long list of names that we will skip over, mostly because I do a horrible job of pronouncing these names, so I will spare you that experience. Now, I'm going to go back to chapter 9, the end of chapter 9, and the reason for that is verse 38. Probably, I don't know, I kind of mentioned this about chapter and verse headings are not inspired. And the translators did a horrible job sometimes in placement. So really the thought here begins in verse 38. So we'll read that and then go over into chapter 10. It said, in view of all this, now this was the prayer that we studied last time, the long prayer. In view of all this, we are making a binding agreement in writing on a sealed document containing the names of our leaders, Levites, and priests. So that's the thought. And then when we get to chapter 10, as you can see, this is the list of leaders. Those whose seals were on the documents were, and then Nehemiah the governor. And then again, I'm just going to go all the way down because I'm not going to read all of these names here. As you can see, this long list of names. And this is they agreed to, abide by God's law, correct the sins that they had committed. Now, picking up in verse 28, the rest of the people, the priests, Levites, gatekeepers, singers, and temple servants, along with their wives, sons, and daughters, everyone who is able to understand and who has separated themselves from the surrounding people to obey the law of God. So this was, again, the whole case in Ezra and in Nehemiah. One of the problems, they married pagan people, and it was introducing pagan sin back into the land. This is why they're saying this. They separated themselves. They divorced those wives, and the sad thing was some of those marriages had children, but they put them away. They were pagan. Verse 29. It says, join with their noble brothers and commit themselves with a sworn oath to follow the law of God given through God's servant Moses, and to carefully obey all the commands, ordinances, and statutes of Yahweh our Lord. We will not give our daughters in marriage to the surrounding peoples, and will not take their daughters as wives for our sons. Now again, this does not say that a person who proselytes or embraces the God of Israel, that he's not talking about that. For example, Ruth, Rahab. Okay, the book of Ruth, you see that she was a Moabitess, but she actually became the great grandmother of King David. Verse 31. When the surrounding peoples bring merchandise of any kind of grain to sell on the Sabbath day, we will not buy from them on the Sabbath or a holy day. We will also leave the land uncultivated in the 7th year, and will cancel every day. Now, this is something that they wasn't doing for all this time since they came out of Egypt, since the law was given. Notice a couple of things he said here. Buying and selling on the Sabbath day. Greed overcame them. And then secondly, he says too, we will leave the land uncultivated. The reason for the 70-year The reason for the 70-year exile, God said, was I'm going to give the land that you did not let rest. So they said, we're going to keep that. And then he said, we will cancel every debt every 7th year. Verse 32, we will impose the following commands on ourselves: to give 1/8 of an ounce of silver yearly for the service of the house of God, the bread displayed before the Lord, the daily grain offering, the regular burnt offering, the Sabbath, the new moons, offerings and appointed festivals, the holy things, and sin offerings, to atone for Israel and for all the work of the house of our God. We have cast lots among the priests, Levites, and the people for the donation of wood by our ancestral house at the appointed times of each year. They are to bring the wood to our God's house to burn on the altar of the Lord our God, as it is written in the law. We will bring the first fruits of our land and of every fruit tree to the Lord's house year by year. We will also bring the firstborn of our sons and our livestock as prescribed by the law, and will bring the firstborn of our herds and flocks to the house of our God, to the priests who will serve in the house of God. So the service, we're going to again give the free will offerings for that. Verse 37, we will bring a loaf from our first batch of dough to the priests in the storerooms of the house of our God. We will also bring the first fruits of our grain offerings and of every fruit tree and of new wine and oil. 1/10 of our land produce belongs to the Levites. For the Levites are to collect 1/10 offering in our agriculture towns. The priests of Aaronic descent must accompany the Levites when they collect the 1/10, and the Levites must take 1/10 of the offerings to the storerooms of the treasuries in the house of our God. For the Israelites and the Levites are to bring the contributions of grain, new wine, and oil to the storerooms where the articles of the sanctuaries are kept, and where the priests who ministers are, along with the gatekeepers and singers. We will not neglect the house of our God. But another one of the sins that they would do. In other words, you go back to the Levitical law, it provided for the priests to be cared for, and that means the temple, all the surrounding lands. Okay. Chapter 11, verse 1 says, now the leaders of the people stayed in Jerusalem, and the rest of the people cast lots for 1 out of 10 to come and live in Jerusalem, the holy city, while the other 9 remained in their towns. The people praised all the men who volunteered to live in Jerusalem. Now you remember, only a fraction came back, so the city was very sparse. It was low in population, and they actually had to entice people to say, hey, live in the city. Okay, that would be appealing to me only because I'm thinking traffic. They didn't have traffic back then, of course, but the fact that there's not a lot of people would have appealed to me. Verse 3, these are the heads of the province who stayed in Jerusalem, but in the villages of Judah. Each lived in his own property in the towns, and the Israelite priests, Levites, temple servants, descendants of Solomon's servants, while some of the descendants of Judah and Benjamin settled in Jerusalem. And then he goes on and says, Judah's descendants. Now again, I'm going to spare you all of these names here. And then so you had the descendants of Judah, the Benjamites, and then he says the priests. And then give all these names of these people. Then the Levites, and then the gatekeepers. The priests, gatekeepers, had the care of the temple. And then the rest of the priests, verse 20, the rest of the priests and the Levites were in all the village of Judah, each on his own inherited property. The temple servants lived in Ophel, Zihah, and Gizpah, supervised the temple servants. And it says the leader of the Levites in Jerusalem was, and then again all these names, and there was in fact a command of the king regarding them as ordinance regulating the king's daily tasks. Again, more names. And then it says, as far as farming settlements with their farms, some of the descendants live in Kirith Arab and its villages. And then you give all these names here. And again, I'm not going to, let me look at verse 36. Some of the Judeans' divisions of Levites were in Benjamin. Now, again, I'm not giving you all of these names here because sparing you the awful pronunciation of them. Chapter 12 says, these are the priests and Levites who went up with Zubral the son of Shealtiel and with Joshua. Now, Zubral was the governor of Jerusalem himself. And he, by the way, is mentioned in Zechariah, the prophecy of Zechariah. So again, you see all of these names here. Then it said down in verse 7, these were the leaders of the priests and their relatives in the day of Jeshua. Now, actually, the other pronunciation is Joshua. Okay, the Levites, and then these names, who were their listing. Then in the days of Joachim, the leaders of the priestly families were, and you see all of these names here. And then verse 22, in the days of Elizabeth, and then you see Jehonan and Judah, the leaders of the families of the Levites and the priests, were recorded with while Darius the Persians ruled. Now, Darius would also give us a timeline. Darius, the kingdom. So sometimes if you study in your Bible, and I did have a chart up, you can kind of gauge what time we're talking about right here. The Levites' descendants, the leaders' families, are recorded in the book of the historical records during the days of Jehonan, the son of Eliashib. The leaders of the Levites, and then they give you these names, let's go down to verse 27. So all of these were servants of the temple, the care of the temple, the priests, the high priests, the gatekeepers, the singers. Those were all of these long list of names that cared for the temple. And then the leaders, okay, were those that, took care. They were the leaders, governors, all that kind of stuff in Jerusalem. Okay. Verse 27 says, that's the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem. Now remember, that was Nehemiah's task, to rebuild the wall, kind of get the city going back again. It says, at the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, they sent for the Levites wherever they lived and brought them to Jerusalem to celebrate the joyous dedication with thanksgiving and singing, accompanied by cymbals, harps, and lyres. The singers gathered from the region around Jerusalem, from the villages of the Netophites and the Bethites, and from the fields of Gebites and Asmath. Okay, forget that. For they built the villages for themselves around Jerusalem. After the priests and Levites had purified themselves, they purified the people and the gates and the walls. This was this big, again, celebration. You could actually say Nehemiah completed his task. Verse 13, then I brought the leaders of Judah up to the top of the wall, and I appointed 2 large processions that gave thanks. One went to the right of the wall, the other the dung gate. Hosea and the half of the leaders followed Judah. Leaders of Jerusalem. Hosea and the half the leaders of Judah followed, along with Azariah, Ezra. And then he gives all these other names, some of the priests with the trumpets, Zechariah, all these names. Okay. Verse 37, at the fountain gate, they climbed the steps of the city of David on the ascent of the wall and went above the house of David to the water gate on the east. And then it says the second Thanksgiving procession went to the left, and I followed it with half the people along the top of the wall, past the tower of the ovens to the broad wall above the gate Ephraim by the old gate, the fish gate, the tower of Hinal, and the tower of 100 to the sheep gate. They stopped at the gate of the guard. And the 2 Thanksgiving possessions stood in the house of God. So did I, and half of the officials accompanied me, as well as the priests. Then you see these names here. And the priests and singers sang with Jezreiah as the leaders. On that day they offered great sacrifice and rejoiced because God had given them great joy. The women and children also celebrated in Jerusalem. Jerusalem rejoicing was heard far away. So he's had this big procession. I'm told around the area of Jerusalem there that there is the acoustics openly. You could. It's very good. That's why I think it's saying this here. And then on the same day, men were placed in charge of the rooms of the house and the supplies, contributions, first fruits, and tenth. The legality required portion for the priests and the Levites were gathered from the village field, because Judah was grateful to the priests and the Levites who were serving. They performed the service of their God and the service of purification along with the singers and gatekeepers, as David and his son Solomon prescribed. For long ago, in the days of David and Asaph, there were leaders of the singers and songs of praise and thanksgiving to God. So in the days of Zerubbabel and Nehemiah, now again, Zerubbabel was kind of leader of Jerusalem. Nehemiah was the kind of the governor in the Judah, the area of Judah, or the region of Judah. It says, in all the contributions, the daily portions for the singers and the gatekeepers, they also set aside daily portion for the Levites. And the Levites set aside daily portions for the descendants of Aaron. So this was the, again, dedication of the wall that Nehemiah was tasked to complete. He also was tasked to him and Ezra established true worship, the Levitical priesthood, the teaching of the people of the law. So one of the greatest contributions you see here was to get them on track with the things of God. Sadly, of course, as Israel's history, we know it wouldn't last. So that's the thing. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP The Bible Perspective. As always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comments section below. All comments are welcome. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I'll see you in the next study.